CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories on CGTN. Closing in on the capital, civilians flee Kyiv as Russian forces move closer to the city. And overwhelmed Ukraine's neighbours struggle to cope as more than 2.5 million refugees pour across the border. And
there they are in there.
Born into danger, how 3 premature babies were evacuated from Kyiv. So evacuations of civilians from frontline towns in Ukraine's Kyiv region are underway today. But Ukrainian officials say heavy shelling and threats of Russian air attacks are endangering the process. President Zelensky says Russia is sending in more troops to take the Ukrainian capital. Well, let's take you live now to our correspondent Michael Voss, who's in Lviv in western Ukraine. And Michael, what is the latest on the conflict where you are and indeed those evacuations?
Well, the battle for the capital, Kiev, is starting really to heat up now. You remember that long 60-kilometre line of Russian tanks that have just been standing still for the last week or two? They've started to disperse. They're starting to encircle the city, meeting fierce resistance, heavy fighting going on to the northwest and on the east of the capital. Villages and the outlying areas are being heavily shelled. There is plenty of fighting going on there. But even though the Russians are taking heavy casualties, they are making slow but steady progress. They're now said to be just 25 kilometers from the capital. Now, also, there's lots of other towns being encircled, being shelled. There's Chernihiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and then in the south, Mykolaiv, which is being shelled. Apparently a cancer hospital has been shelled there, but though we can't confirm that. That's a key town, because if the Russians take that, then troops could move down towards the big iconic port city of Odessa. And then there's Mariupol, which is still, as far as we know, these humanitarian corridors. Every day for 6 days they've been promised this. There are at least 1,000 deaths, maybe many, many more. It's freezing, there's no electricity, heating, little water, food. There's pressure now on President Putin from European leaders to let that humanitarian corridor open so that they can get out. There's been a press conference by the president, Volodymyr Zelensky. He said that so far 1,300 Ukrainian troops have been killed in the fighting, and I suspect there's going to be more before this is over.
And what about where you are, Michael? Earlier when we crossed to you, we could hear music playing in the background. Indeed, we can hear that now. Is there a sense that in Lviv things are safe?
Yeah. It certainly feels like it. I mean, this could be a Saturday evening in any northern Eastern European town at the moment. But at the same time, you've got bombing going on at airfields 2 hours north, 2 hours south. People are worried, and still more refugees are flooding into this town. The mayor says about 200,000 of them, and some of them are orphans. I went to see a group of them earlier.
10-year-old Slavik is busy making camouflage netting for the Ukrainian army. Like 14-year-old Masha, they're pleased to be doing something to help. They're both orphans from the disputed, war-torn region of Donetsk and Luhansk, evacuated to the relative safety of Lviv.
Yes, I think it's important. It can help our soldiers to protect their lives. It's been heavily bombed in Shastya. Many civilians died. It's impossible to sleep there because all you can hear is explosions.
They help the soldiers who protect them and it makes them happy. Many of our children write letters and send drawings to the soldiers fighting at the front line.
When there are air raid sirens, a lot of them still get really scared, and what we have in here is a shelter where they come. The mattresses on the floor are not for sleeping, but this is where they come when the air raid sirens come up, and we've had 2 in the last 24 hours.
A total of 80 orphans were sent by train and bus on the 1,000-kilometre journey across Ukraine. Most have lost their parents to the conflict.
I feel okay, as I am already used to the sirens, but of course it is still scary. Nobody knows what can happen any minute or hour.
Children are children. At first they were in a rather bad psychological condition, but they recover quickly if they are treated well, if they eat well and there are no bombardments.
Institutional life like this is never easy for children who've lost their parents. At least here they're in a safe and secure environment. No one knows, though, if the fighting and bombing could eventually reach this far western corner of Ukraine. As we were leaving the orphanage, we could hear singing coming from the basement. It was the staff coming together to practice patriotic songs. It's not just the children who find this conflict so hard to bear.
Some 1.5 million refugees have ended up going from Ukraine to Poland, the majority of them coming through here, Lviv. They've arrived by train, by bus, by car, and then going on. But about 200,000 are actually staying in this city. And people here are working very hard to look after them, but they're expecting many more to come in the coming days and probably weeks. Polly.
Michael Voss, thank you. Now, Professor Michael Clarke is a security analyst and former Director General of the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. I asked him the state of Russia's military advance in Ukraine.
Their offensive has stalled quite badly after the first couple of weeks. They intended to get all of this done, first of all, in the first 3 days, then by the 8th of March latest, and here we are on the 11th, 12th of March, and they still haven't. So they've more or less reached phase 1, and they're beginning phase 2, which is now to bring in more troops because they're running out of troops. And they are obviously surrounding Kiev, the capital, and so the Battle of Kiev, or the negotiations over Kiev, will start very soon. Meanwhile, they are caught in front of Odessa. They're going to find it very difficult to move on Odessa. They are still failing to take any of the cities that they've surrounded, apart from Kherson in the south. So it's not going very well. On the other hand, numbers do count, and ultimately, if they bring enough numbers in, the Ukrainian forces will crack as formed units, as official forces, because flesh and blood can only do so much. And at some point, those Ukrainian units will probably dissolve into the territorial units, the 25 brigades, which are ready to defend the regions of Ukraine. So then the war will enter a third stage.
And Kyiv is the prize, isn't it? With these tank battalions, infantry battalions looming on the battle space around the city. Just how likely is it that the Russians are up to this?
Well, they are up for it in the sense that they're bringing their artillery, and they've failed to make much headway with infantry. They're not doing terribly well with their armour, mainly because they're running out of fuel, and they exhausted most of their ammunition in the first 3 days because the Ukrainians fought so ferociously, and Russian troops are not very experienced, so they fired off all their ammunition, which they've been issued with. So they had to wait for more ammunition and more fuel to arrive. But once they use their artillery and their rockets, then they are in a position to pound Kiev from the outside, working inwards. The question is, will they do it? I suspect that they will be ordered to do it, and it will be a long and very bitter struggle. But I don't think they'll try to walk into the city anytime soon, because they know it's been made into a fortress, and the fact that the Ukrainians have fought so well in the first 2 weeks has meant that the Kiev has had time to fortify itself. And in fact, they were doing quite a lot of preparations beforehand, although they didn't talk too much about it. So it will be a very, very tough nut for the Russians to crack.
And of course, the other card Putin is playing is that he's looking now at bringing in legions of foreigners, largely from the Middle East, who've all applied to join the Russian fight. What do you think of that approach as a strategy from Putin?
It's a moment of desperation when the second or third biggest military force in the world has to rely on mercenaries from other countries. Then something's gone badly wrong. There's some sort of political gain for Putin, he thinks, in this, to show that Russia is not isolated in doing this. He hasn't got any Kazakhs fighting for him. He hasn't yet got any Belarusians fighting for him, but he can bring in Syrians and some African mercenaries. But in fact, these people are ultra groups. They're trained soldiers in the sense that they've seen battle before, but these people are not disciplined soldiers. They're the extremists who fight in lots of these conflicts.
Professor Michael Clark speaking to me earlier. Still to come here on CGTN. 1.6 million. Poland scrambles to accommodate the largest influx of refugees it's seen since the Second World War.
The British public not only need to know, but really want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
We look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mum is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bringing all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
So it was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Join us on March the 13th as we mark the 50th anniversary of China's full diplomatic relations with the UK, as we launch our special To the Future Together on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Welcome back. A reminder of our news headlines. Closing in on the capital, civilians flee Kiev as Russian forces move closer to the Ukrainian city. And overwhelmed Ukraine's neighbours struggle to cope as more than 2.5 million refugees pour across the border. And born into danger, how 3 premature babies were evacuated from Kiev. With war raging in Ukraine, the country's neighbours are scrambling to provide shelter for refugees. The UN's Refugee Agency says nearly 2.6 million people have now left Ukraine. 1.6 million of them have ended up in Poland. That's the largest influx of refugees the country has seen since World War II. Well, Natalie Carney joins us now live from the Poland-Ukraine border. Natalie, can Poland cope with this influx?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Obviously, we're here seeing the influx of people that are entering Poland. Here are just 2 of them, 2 lovely young boys. What is your name?
Andrei.
Andrea, and your name?
Zhenya.
Shenka, and your age?
I am age.
Your age?
10. I am 10.
You are 10, and you're 8?
8.
Where did you come from?
I'm from Ukraine, or I'm from Kharkiv.
From Kharkiv?
Yes.
And you are from Kharkiv as well?
Yes.
How was your journey here? When did you leave Kharkiv?
I live Kharkiv in Oblast.
In Oblast Kharkiv?
Oblast Kharkiv.
So as you can see, I mean, this train station in the east of Poland is just filled with people that have left Ukraine, coming into Poland, fleeing the war. Many of them, as you can see, are women and children, as the men have been requested to stay in the Ukraine. We see a lot of pets around, and the Polish people have really come out to lend their hand to try to help these people. We're seeing food handouts, people making foods in their own kitchens to hand out to the people here. There's toys being handed out, even pet food to the dogs and the cats that we've seen come through this train station. The European Union has also stepped forward, saying they will help Poland as they struggle with the biggest influx of refugees since World War II, with upwards of 500 million euros. That's going to help with the resources for help Poland provide these people with resources. But what we are hearing from the government of the Ukrainians that enter Poland, about 40% of them carry on to other countries across the European Union. Germany and Italy as well are two of the most popular countries for Ukrainians to go due to the population of Ukrainians in those countries.
And Natalie, what about other countries aside from Italy and Germany, Moldova, neighbouring countries doing to take some of the pressure off countries like Poland?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the majority of the Ukrainians prefer to come to Poland for many reasons, because there's a 500-kilometer border between the two countries. There's also some cultural, linguistic exchanges between the two countries, similarities. And there's already 1 million Ukrainians that have been living and working here. So a lot of these people will carry on through Poland to other family members in the country. But as you've mentioned, yes, other bordering countries such as Hungary has taken in about 236,000. Slovakia will take 108, or has taken 186,000. Moldova, 105,000. And Romania with 85,000. Where are you going? Will you stay in Poland?
We in Polsha. I don't know.
You don't know. And that's the situation, unfortunately, with a lot of the people here. They simply don't know. They just wanted to run and save their lives.
Natalie Carney, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's the picture in Poland, and unlike the majority of Europe, the UK requires refugees to undergo security checks before being given an entry visa. The system has been criticised by many after Ukrainians in the UK complained relatives were struggling to complete the online forms. Well, currently Ukrainians with family in the UK can apply for entry. Let's get the very latest now from Yola Abdavid, who joins me now in the studio. What are these changes to the system following this criticism likely to be next week, Yola?
It's called the local sponsorship scheme. That is, if there are people living in the UK, and so far there are a few thousand people who said that they're willing to put up people for possibly between 6 and 12 months. So they would then look after these people or offer them rooms or a house or somewhere to stay while they're in the UK, while the war is still ongoing in Ukraine. So that is the new announcement we are expecting, not from Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, but from Michael Gove as the Communities and Levelling Up and Communities Minister. And it is quite interesting, and it's raising some eyebrows, why there are two government departments, because the UK government probably has been stung by criticism, not just from other European countries, but also by the sheer numbers of people now arriving in Poland, and also that only around 1,000 people so far have managed to secure visas to actually go into Britain. And of course that is in contrast to a lot of other European countries, and that's why we're expecting this announcement on Monday.
Yola Abdavid for the moment. Thanks very much indeed. Well, Vladimir Putin of Russia has once again been speaking to the French President Emmanuel Macron. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was also in on the three-way call between the leaders. It's the 12th time Macron has spoken to Putin in the last month, and the 5th since the start of the war itself. Moscow's new media law severely limits what correspondents in Russia are able to report. So let's talk to our correspondent Giles Gibson, who's in the Latvian capital, Riga. And Giles, Macron and Scholz holding this three-way call with Putin. What did they achieve? Do we know?
Well, we know from the German side that this call went on for about an hour and 15 minutes and that Scholz and Macron called on President Putin to agree to an immediate ceasefire inside Ukraine. However, the Élysée Palace in France have been saying that Vladimir Putin did not appear ready to end this fighting, to end this conflict. The Kremlin have been saying that Vladimir Putin briefed both those European leaders about negotiations that have been ongoing with the Ukrainians. And actually, I just want to bring your attention, just in the last few minutes or so, Dmitry Peskov, President Putin's spokesperson, has actually said that video talks have been going on between the Ukrainian and the Russian delegations, who of course met a couple of times inside Belarus. That's what Dmitry Peskov is saying. We are still waiting for confirmation from the Ukrainian side that that is indeed what is taking place.
That's the diplomatic level for us, Giles. What about locally, domestically? The jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been calling for protests across Russia. Are people likely to support that?
Yeah, Alexei Navalny from his prison cell is able to get these messages out onto social media through his legal team. He is once again calling for there to be a big anti-war protest in Moscow and other Russian cities on Sunday, calling for that at 2 o'clock local time in Moscow. I have to say that I was actually in the Russian capital just about a week ago, the last time Alexei Navalny was calling for a mass protest against this invasion. There was just this massive police presence in the center of Moscow, police everywhere you looked, especially around the Red Square area. You had some people trying to protest almost subtly, so walking around in groups rather than chanting or holding anti-war signs with anti-war slogans. So Alexei Navalny making this call once again, but such has been the police presence around these attempted protests, we are not expecting there to be any sort of a mass gathering allowed by the Russian police on Sunday.
Giles Gibson, thank you. 3 premature babies have been rescued from Kiev. This week, a Russian military airstrike on a maternity hospital in the southern city of Mariupol left 3 people dead and several injured. That's according to the local authorities there. Well, the rescue organisation Project Dynamo is hoping to stop similar events happening in Kiev by evacuating neonatal units early, as Caroline Malone reports.
Racing down the wrong side of the road in Ukraine on a rescue mission to save 3 of the most precious lives.
There they are in there.
Inside the ambulance are 3 tiny humans, babies born prematurely into a war zone. A set of American twin boys, Lenny and Moisha, and British baby girl Sophia hooked up to a ventilator. US military veteran Brian Stern led the rescue mission as part of Project Dynamo, assembling a team of medics to evacuate the babies, Sophia's parents, and 2 Ukrainian women from Kiev.
They were in 2 different hospitals. The boys were in one and the girl was in another. At both hospitals, we heard artillery in the city close enough to where we could hear it and feel it.
They drove into the night for around 14 hours to get to the border and then onto a hospital with a specialist children's department in Rzeszów, Poland. On Wednesday, this maternity and children's hospital in Mariupol was attacked by Russian forces. Scenes like this show just how dangerous it is in parts of Ukraine, even for the youngest of lives. Well, Ukraine has called the attack a war crime without justification, and the international community has condemned it as well, with the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying that people are paying the highest price for a war that has nothing to do with them, and that the senseless violence must stop. On Thursday, Russia's defense ministry denied bombing a maternity and children's hospital, accusing Ukraine of a staged provocation there. More than 2 million people have fled into neighbouring countries since the conflict began on February 24th. The UN has called it the fastest growing refugee crisis since World War II.
It's more of a humanitarian crisis to me. It's akin to a natural disaster, like an earthquake in Haiti, where, and it's amazing how similar it is, because there's buildings flattened everywhere, there's power doesn't work, nothing works, you can't get this, you can't get that, people are running for their lives, begging for help.
Stern and his team have rescued more than 150 people so far from Ukraine. They've also received another 14,000 requests for evacuation from citizens of many different nationalities, as well as Ukrainians. But the urgency and fragility of this rescue stands out. a successful mission to save the most innocent of lives. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
Some news in brief for you now, and Russia's demands for relief from sanctions over Ukraine are putting the Iran nuclear deal at risk, according to Germany, France and the United Kingdom. Talks on saving the deal in Vienna, in Austria, are back on hold, and Russia is accused of putting it in doubt. Moscow is one of the signatories to the 2015 deal in which Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. And Australia will start living soon with COVID-19 as if it were, according to the Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He's ready to move the nation to the so-called Phase D. That's removing all isolation rules, but he says he will consult health experts first. Now to the Beijing Winter Paralympic Games, where Team China is extending its lead on the medal table after winning wheelchair curling gold. Beating the Swedish 8-3, China had lost to Sweden in a rocky start to the round robin, but recovered to win 8 matches in a row. It's the country's 18th gold.
All the teams are strong. We lost 2 games in the beginning. I was not in my best state, but the whole team didn't give up. Our coaches eased our pressure and our performance has improved day by day.
Our team members are very united. Everyone encouraged and helped each other during the match. We told each other to keep holding on.
Congratulations to them. The headlines on CGTN. Closing in on the capital, civilians flee Kiev as Russian forces move closer to the city. And overwhelmed, Ukraine's neighbours struggle to cope as more than 2.5 million refugees pour across the border. And born into danger, 3 premature babies are evacuated from Kyiv. In just a moment, my colleague Stephen Cole will be here with the agenda. And in this week's show, he'll be hearing why critical thinking could save the global economy $8 trillion, and how universities are preparing the decision makers of the future. And that's it for this edition of The World Today. Thank you very much for watching. We are on smart TV apps Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com, and of course the CGTN app. And we're in the UK 24 hours a day on Freeview. More news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, as we said, the agenda with Stephen Cole. From me and all the team in London, goodbye.